This is Tuned Into the Land, the California Rangeland Trust podcast. Here, we will dig into a variety of topics with the partners, conservationists, and ranchers who demonstrate every day, through their words and actions, the importance of conserving California's working lands. Tune in each month to learn more about our mission and how you can get involved in preserving the future of the Golden State for generations to come.
Welcome to another episode of Tune Into the Land. I am your host, Michael Delbar, the CEO of the California Rangeland Trust. In the last episode, we sat down with Senator Melissa Hurtado, the chair of the California State Senate Ag Committee, to get her perspective on current issues facing agriculture and the complex challenges farmers and ranchers face. Between costly regulatory compliance, burdensome taxes, negative public perception, and squeezed profit margins, many agriculturalists struggle to remain in business. For the last 25 years, the Rangeland Trust has worked to keep ranchers ranching because protecting the land and its natural resources matters for all of us. By conserving a rancher's private property through the sale of a conservation easement, the rancher can use those funds received to help support their operation, while simultaneously securing their property's future for a working landscape. We have seen several cases where this solution has helped families avoid selling off the land, therefore keeping them in business as stewards of the range. Today, we have the opportunity to sit down with a man that not only knows about the ongoing challenges that ranchers face, but has lived them. I am joined by one of our landowner partners, who is also a leader and changemaker in the cattle industry, Kevin Kester. Having served as president of the San Luis Obispo County Cattlemen's Association, president of the California Cattlemen's Association, and president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Kevin used the experiences and challenges he's faced to bolster policy changes that have benefited ranchers and farmers across the country. He knows that in order to address these challenges, voices matter, and today we want to share his. So with that, I want to welcome Kevin Kester to the podcast.
Michael, it's my pleasure to be with you today.
Thanks for making the trip down here to San Diego. Kevin, can you share a little history of the Bear Valley Ranch and how you got into the ranching business?
Sure. The last part is easy to answer. I was born into it. It's a simple answer. Our ranching, our family has been in this area since 1867, and on this specific ranch, the Bear Valley Ranch, our family's owned that ranch and operated it since in the last 80 years. So I'm a fifth generation in my family to be a rancher on the central coast of California, and I've got 3 grown children, June and I do, and now we have 6 grandkids, so they potentially represent the 7th generation if they want to continue on ranching in Central California.
So what's it like with a family operation? I know that being part of one, I know there's some challenges there, but there's also many rewards.
Absolutely. A lot of positive rewards and good things working with your family and spouse. So the drawbacks is everything's more personal. So if somebody has a disagreement or different ideas, it gets a little more personal quicker. But overall, the benefits of having a family-run operation are greatly outweigh any negatives. So I love our family operation and interacting with our kids as they were growing up, and then my interaction with my grandfather and dad. So it's a great situation to be in, having a family-run ranch.
Well, if a relationship can survive sorting cattle in a corral, you can survive almost anything.
Yeah, my excuse always is I'm not yelling in the corral at somebody. It's just to get over the noise of the cattle. That's my excuse.
Does it work?
No, not all the time.
So you're on the Central Coast. It has its unique climate. What's it like ranching there?
It's a great part of the world. I think we honestly have the best climate in the world. The Central Coast of California, our ranch runs from 2,000 foot elevation up to 4,000 foot. So we'll have just a touch of snow on a normal winter, maybe a couple times a year where it sticks on the ground, and it gets warm in the summertime. Daytimes on hot days can be approaching 110, but maybe only 9 or 10% humidity. And then in the evenings, because of the westerly breeze coming from the Pacific Ocean, we can have a 60 plus degree variance, and so it cools off into the very low 50s at night is a normal summer morning. So it's the best climate for all aspects.
Well, it's beautiful terrain. Tell us how you manage those cattle. How do you gather them? Are you on the Japanese horses, actual horses? I understand you might even be using some new technology in the drone sense.
Yes, and so all three of those. So we still have our quarter horses for the rougher parts of the ranch, but over the past few decades, we've kind of evolved into using quads more because parts of the ranch are open and we can gather on quads and move cows or steers literally 10 or 15 times faster and save that amount of time and not have the wear and tear on the horses. And then in the last few years, by accident, we discovered we've got a couple of commercial drones. We purchased mostly for trying to find people, as in grow sites for marijuana and things like that, which have been issues on the central coast of California. So in using the drones, we found out that our cows and our steers will react very positive and gently to the sounds of the four rotors. And so we can move cows, get them going across a canyon and move them. The drone batteries are lasting 30 plus minutes nowadays. And so we got 30-minute shots to move cattle, and where it might take us an hour or 2 hours to get around a deep canyon and get the other ridge tops, we can literally just be there in 2 minutes and start the cattle moving. So the drone technology has turned out to be a blessing and a real advantage on helping at the ranch. You're
also utilizing some new technology in terms of some web-based programming and managing your pastures, I think. Is that working out well?
It is so far, at least. So for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the NRCS, we're in the Conservation Stewardship Program, and we have a formal grazing management plan. And so my son, Cody, he is an ag appraiser, and he has the technology training. He's taught himself. We've overlaid USGS maps and overlaid our fields to where we can, in our soils maps, combine all those three things, and we can know to the 100th of an acre how much land is inside each pasture or field. And within that, because of the soils maps, we can get the high, middle, and low range of RDMs and carrying capacity. And so we can manage on paper, but it's actually very realistic numbers of our carrying capacity depending upon the rain year for each field and plan ahead. So it's been very beneficial using that technology through a technology-based system administered by a company called AgroWeb. And it's really helped us out on managing our cows and each individual cow, the history and data on each cow, and mix it into our technology with our formal grazing management plan. And so all that in the last few years, the technology has really helped keep us ahead of the curve for properly managing the ranch.
For those who may not know, RDM means residual dry matter, or the amount of grass on the ground, and carrying capacity refers to the number of animals the land can support. You've diversified a little bit with some vineyards, I believe.
Yeah, starting in 1999, I did want to diversify and we were just strictly stocker operation with a few cows, and so we've increased our commercial cow-calf operation, and as well as we planted the first 50 acres of wine grapes, and then I did another vineyard in 2013 to expand to another 50 acres. So that diversification really helps on the ag cycles, where if the cattle markets are higher, it seems to be a correlation where, for whatever reason, the wine grape markets are a little softer. And so it goes back and forth, but the diversification helps spread risk out.
Oh, perfect. So the Bear Valley Ranch was one of the first ranches, actually, that was conserved with Rangeland Trust. But tell us how you took a risk on a fairly new organization and decided to conserve your ranches.
Right. So the main factor that got us thinking about conservation easement was the day my grandfather passed away in 1993. It created a taxable event with the Internal Revenue Service with the state tax, which we commonly refer to not so fondly as the death tax. We owed the federal government $2 million at the time. We didn't have the $2 million because all our assets are in dirt, right? Which is a common case with a lot of ranchers. So we started looking for ways not to break up the ranch or have to sell parts of it in order to pay that debt to the federal government. And a few years later, the California Cattlemen Association started having these meetings on talking about forming a nonprofit for conservation easements, which turned out to be the California Rangeland Trust. And so I can still remember sitting in those meetings in the late 1990s and listening to that. And I was thinking that, boy, this is a real win-win possibility for California ranches as well as our own personal situation. So I applied when CRT was formed and started in business. I applied an application, and because of our we had a 10-year deadline. We had an extension from the government. We had 10 years. So by 2002, we were in dire straits for the cash flow purpose. And so we went to the top of the list with the California Rangeland Trust. And we ultimately ended up being, as you mentioned, the first project from start to finish that the CRT did. So I was very thankful for that. And doing a conservation easement on our ranch actually not only kept the ranch one piece operating for future generations, it's a good thing to do for sustainability and keeping the landscapes working landscapes. So it was a double win for the ranch, for our family ranching opportunity, as well as the taxpayers of California.
Well, we're very glad you did that and very proud to have you as one of our landowner partners. You mentioned the death tax. That's a huge issue for any business, really, but particularly in agriculture. We also have many other challenges to keeping our ranchers and farmers on the land. Our last episode of Tune Into the Land, we had Senator Hurtado, California State Senator, who's also the chair of the Senate Ag Committee. We asked her from her perspective as an elected official what she saw as the challenges facing ranchers in California. So, Kevin, same question to you. From a rancher's perspective, what do you see as the challenges facing ranchers?
I've said for many years, especially when I was traveling across the nation as president and the leadership of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the number one thing that keeps me up at night is the cost of regulations. And California is a prime example of that. When I traveled to other ranching and beef and cattle states, they don't have the cost of doing business because of regulatory burdens that California does. And so the one thing about California, I don't think it's an intentional jab in putting something through the heart of ranchers to put us out of business by any one entity. But if you start looking at our local, regional, state, federal regulations from a host of different agencies, they all add up to being a very costly endeavor to comply with those regulations to stay in business. So that's the one thing that keeps me up at night, is just trying to figure out and be an advocate to explain what we do as cattle ranchers in California, not to have agency or state elected officials unintentionally put us out of business.
Yeah, we like to say it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Absolutely.
You know, the first one is like, that hurt a little bit, but I'm still alive.
Yep.
Pretty soon, after 999 more, it gets you. Those challenges, as you saw trying to stay in business, did that lead you into your advocacy work on behalf of ranchers in California? It
did. So as I mentioned before, when my grandfather passed away in 1993 and created that tax burden, I started getting involved with policy efforts for taxes. and not only at the state level, but a lot in Washington, D.C. And so I found out being involved actually made a difference. And it just kept me going because I could see by showing up, making the case, especially Washington, D.C., most people don't think one person can make a difference, but one person can make a difference if you just show up, make your case, and have people listen to you. So that got me started, and just one thing led to another at the local county cattlemen's level, led me to the state California Cattlemen, and that led me to national and international issues with National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And so for me, it was just kind of a 15-year natural progression on just increasing advocacy and for ranchers and farmers in the country.
Well, we're glad you did, because you successfully led not only CCA but NCBA, and we're very proud to have you from California doing that. As NCBA president, you represent producers across the country. As you mentioned, the uniqueness of challenges in California, that you don't see that in other states. What issues do you see really facing the rest of the country, above and beyond just California?
Well, across the whole country, regulations and policies out of Washington, D.C. Affect us all. Taxes, estate taxes, other kinds of taxes affect us all. There's a lot of environmental regulations from Washington, D.C. and Sacramento. They affect us all. And so Waters of the United States is one good example that keeps popping up time after time. There's also marketing issues. And as time has gone on, especially in the last 20 years, our international trade portfolio for beef has increased manyfold. Between 20 and 25% of value for each fed heifer and steer carcass in the U.S. gets exported. It's a value-added market for a lot of parts of the beef carcass that U.S. consumers don't necessarily want to buy, and other cultures and other countries will pay a premium for. So our international trade is really expanded and become an extremely important part of how we do business.
During your tenure as going through the leadership of NCBA, were there any big policy issues that took a lot of your time, or you really focused on?
Right. Two things. The answer is yes, there were. So I'll preface it with saying I was on the officer team leadership with NCBA for 6 years. 2018, I was the president pre-COVID, right? And President Trump was in office. And so we worked closely at the White House and administration on the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill. I was up on the stage. President Trump had me literally within 6 inches of his left elbow for the photo ops because of the cowboy hat. Yeah, so that was one example. And then we had international trade. So I got Craig Uden and I, he was the 2017 NCBA president. We went to Beijing with Secretary Sonny Perdue, Ag Secretary, and participated in the signing of the China-U.S. trade agreement for beef. So that was a big deal. We went officially in July 1st of 2017, we went from official zero trade for beef, U.S. beef with China, to last year we did more than $2 billion in 1 year with China, just China alone. Wow. So those kind of opportunities add hundreds of dollars per steer of value for the U.S. rancher. So I think those kinds of things are huge wins, and we just need to keep advocating for it.
Those are some great successes. What do you see as the greatest limitation to achieving successful policy change?
Our numbers. Ranchers and farmers in general across the country, we keep getting less and less of us, right? And so the biggest thing we have that's hard to overcome sometimes is politicians look at, well, how many of you are there when you go into an office or advocating for position, because politicians just start counting how many votes, right? And that's just the truth of the way the political system works. So the good thing is, for our small numbers, we're still the guys in the white hats in Washington, and to an extent in Sacramento still also. So we get a lot of leverage for our small numbers compared to other industries. And so we get a lot of leverage and have a lot of success. But I see going into the future, as there are less and less ranchers and people in the cattle business, we have to be nimble and figure out ways to overcome that part of the equation politically.
Having walked the halls of Congress back there, same time you have been, you speak of the white hats, cowboy hats being worn, it gets attention. And the members notice us. And I think that says a lot. They like the romance of the quote cowboys walking into their office, and they tend to, for the most part, at least listen to us. But you're right, it's a challenge, and it's a big challenge trying to let them or help them understand when there are fewer and fewer telling the story. But how important is telling the story? We tend as a group, for a large part, tend to be a little more private and not wanting to talk a lot about what's going on the ranch.
You're absolutely right. It's inherent in most of us in agriculture that we want to keep our business more private than not, and not let people know our business. But in order to stay in business, we have to overcome those tendencies that we grew up with and get out and form relationships at our local government levels, our state government levels, and all the way back to Washington, D.C. And it takes time and effort and good staffs with our trade associations to represent us when we're not there every day. So I can't overstate how important it is to keep that in mind and just not keep your head buried in the sand, so to speak, back at the ranch, thinking that as long as I'm out here on the ranch taking care of my business and my cattle, everything else will work out, because there are people advocating to put us out of business every day, every hour in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento. And so it takes effort and time to do whatever a rancher can. And sometimes if it's just clicking on a letter in support or writing a check, any amount of dollars helps the political system with our political action committees, both at California Cattlemen and NCBA. So just being engaged and pay attention and helping wherever you can, and just taking a little bit of time out of your business and your life to advocate for the business for our future generations. It's really, really important.
As the average age of the rancher, not just in California, but across the country, increases, or at least at a minimum doesn't decrease, but we do have a lot of interest amongst the next generation and the younger generations in agriculture, which is wonderful. Do you see a difference in that attitude of storytelling between latter generation and the younger generation? Is there still that sense of, I'd rather just sit on my horse and ride the range and everything else can just go away and it'll all be better, maybe, hopefully? Or is there more of a desire to tell that story? Has social media, the rise of social media and the popularity, helped encourage more sharing and more storytelling amongst the next generation?
So I'm a baby boomer, so I can relate. My grown son and two grown daughters are millennials. And so, in fact, my son Cody, he's 34. He and I were talking just this past week, and he was telling me, Dad, I want to get more engaged with California Cattlemen and start going to meetings. And when they were growing up in high school and stuff, I took them on trips. They attended a lot of CCA conventions and meetings, and as well as back in D.C. To meetings with NCBA and representing CCA back there. But now that they're married, have kids, they're starting to get that stage in their life, in their mid-30s, that they can see where they need to start to be engaged. So across the country, to answer your question, maybe 10 years ago, I was more concerned about that because the average age, according to USDA numbers, is of a farmer and rancher in the U.S. is 59 years old, and it is still getting older each year a little bit. So I am happy over the last 10 years from my travels to see smart, bright, young, energetic generations starting to show up at meetings, at State Cattlemen's Association meetings across the whole country. And so now I can say that I am enthused about the future of the ranching and the cattle industry in the U.S. and California, because I see the younger folks realizing how important it is to be engaged. And they have a foot up on me as a baby boomer because they are technology trained. That's all they've had cell phones most of their lives and computers. So operating technology is a second nature to them, where I've had to learn everything as it came in. So to be able to have the ability and desire, social media and all the platforms that go with that, to tell our message, it's going to help us a whole bunch in the future. On the flip side of that, the people who want to put us out of business are also very good at telling their story and or what they want the public to believe is a story. So our younger generations have their challenges cut out for them, but I am enthusiastic that we have the brightest and great minds entering and staying within our ranching and farming and agriculture sectors here in the U.S. and California. So I'm enthusiastic. I think we've got a bright future.
I agree with you. But one of the challenges we also have is having the land for them on which they can farm and ranch. And I think that's one of the areas that, as an organization, Rangeland Trust works hard to help ensure that their land is available for each generation as we go. What do you see as the nexus between the work that you've done, what you see is for the future, and the work that Rangeland Trust is doing?
Well, it's huge for several reasons. Number one, California Rangeland Trust was formed by Cattlemen and is a nonprofit, a 501c3. And if a person wants to be engaged in protecting our ranches and keeping them as working ranches, the California Rangeland Trust and the opportunity to voluntarily, and that's a big thing, it's all voluntarily. If a rancher wants to investigate and look into the things that the California Rangeland Trust does, they can do it. Our biggest challenge, I think, for ranchers who want to participate in easements and conservation, it takes funding to do that. And so the CRT's biggest challenge, I think, and I'm sure you would probably agree, that finding the dollars to take care of the current backlog of interest there is in California. And so that's always going to be a challenge for the foreseeable future, and we've got to work at that to educate private donations as well as some funding from state conservation bonds when they come across the board, is to give the message how important it is to preserve and keep working landscapes working in the ranching business for our future generations. It's good for Californians, and it's good for the ranching business.
Hard to say it better than that. You're absolutely right. We have over 225,000 acres in the queue. They're only in the queue because we're trying to find the funds to make them happen. And that's funding that, as you well know very personally, can save the ranch. And we are working hard to do that, but we hear the interest from our policymakers about how important it is for agricultural land conservation. That doesn't always translate into the appropriations. And so when we look at what it would take to clear our backlog, it's about $250 million. And that's just not a number we pulled out of the air. That's a number that, using the data available and comps in the sales, and we've come up with that number, and it's pretty darn close to what I think it would be. But telling that story, not only in terms of the big issues of regulatory challenges and taxation and all the things that we've talked about, or you've talked about today, but it's also telling the story of how important it is to protect the land. Because without the land, we won't have anywhere to farm or ranch, and we won't be able to provide the food and fiber that the ranchers, and not just in California, of course, but across the country are providing for us. And the food security issues and all those that go with it are at risk.
Yeah, there's things we can do. I sit on a couple of boards, nonprofit boards. There are helping fund research for carbon sequestration, and there's very little of the science for rangeland, whether it be here in California with our annual grasses, the Midwest with prairie grasses, a lot of the West with perennials. We need more research, because if we have the research that can show scientifically for climate issues, greenhouse gas, carbon sequestration, how cattle and the ground, our ranches, can help solve climate issues and global warming and all the buzzwords that politicians like to use, that will help free up funding and get politicians' attention to find the funds to help us. As you know, we've been back to Washington, D.C. It's not simple. Well, it is simple from a rancher's cowboy logic. There's some funds back in Washington where if they would just change one little regulatory constraint to allow third-party easement holders access those funds, we'd have hundreds of millions of dollars available for ranch conservation across the country. The money is there. Instead of governments, states, and federal government agencies buying ranches outright and then becoming parts of the federal bureaucracy in ownership through BLM or pick whatever agency you want to. If we could do conservation easements for those funds and keep those ranches within private ownership, paying taxes, and the ranchers running them, that would be a win-win. And I think someday we'll get there. We just need to have more time, and we need more research so we have science on our side to tell our story.
Well, I think you nailed it, Kevin. I was just back there in D.C. a few weeks ago trying to hammer that message home. And it's critical to have third parties like the California Rangeland Trust and other land trusts have access to those funds and hold those easements that are funded by these federal dollars. Without that ability, then landowners would have to partner with the government. And most private landowners don't like that option. They'd rather partner with a land trust like the Rangeland Trust to hold their easements. So we really have to work hard to get that language changed so that qualified third parties can hold conservation easements funded with these federal dollars. The opposition to that third-party language tends to come from some of the folks that claim to be on the environmental side or the conservation side. And it makes you kind of wonder what it is that they don't understand about how logical, as you said, that argument is. Government has a hard time managing the lands they do have. We know that. That's not a secret. That's anybody would have a hard time arguing that they will manage all their land, because they can't. And we see that. We saw that in the fires in California, a perfect example of that. But even in our state 30 by 30 goals, public lands that have timber management or have grazing regimes aren't counted because they see that as not durably conserved, which is nuts.
Yep.
Because that without management, that land is not taken care of and it's not healthy. And it is a tinderbox that we've seen blow up too often in this state. And the results of that, besides the loss of land and habitat and wildlife, and now we can't get insurance in the state if you're a resident or have a ranch, and it's hard to find insurance now because so are we. And it's really hard, and government's not always the answer. And trying to find a way to access those funds that are there, we could do so much And fortunately, there's a lot that understand that and are working towards that. But we do have an uphill battle.
Yep. We just have to keep plugging away and not give up.
Never. Any last thoughts on how folks can get involved in the ranching industry, the farming industry? I share your optimism and excitement when we see the folks wanting to get into this industry. We see that, and my daughter's an FFA advisor, and her classes are the enthusiasm I see. And this is just one small little high school, a little bit bigger than Parkfield, but not much. And I see that, and it gives me hope.
Right.
And we had in our office, when the state FFA conference was in Sacramento a year ago or so, several schools came in, and when they left, we all looked at each other and our staff and said, wow, this gives us hope for the future.
Yep, and that's one of our huge challenges, is how to, especially in California with our higher land values compared to most other states, how financially to get young people that want to continue or be even first generation ranchers, how do we afford them that opportunity? And so we've got to think outside the box and offer ways and opportunities and keep working on that, because you're right. There are a lot, and I personally know a lot of young, smart people who would make great ranchers. They just don't have the funds to go to a bank and say, I want to lease a ranch or purchase property and start building on that. And so we've got to advocate for ways for maybe people who can leave in their wills or their succession planning, estate planning, to formulate ways to even get strangers involved in. We just have to think outside the box is my message, and it's hard, but we can't give up on that either.
Well, Kevin, thank you. This has been really valuable, and we appreciate you making the trip down here to San Diego. We're in town for an event this evening, and you will be speaking at that, and appreciate you and June making the trip down here to spend some time with the Rangeland Trust and spending time today on Tune Into the Land.
I'm glad to do it. I appreciate the California Rangeland Trust and their mission, and we just got to keep working together and be successful.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Well, this closes the gate on another episode of Tune Into the Land. Thanks for listening, and be sure to hit that follow button so you can be notified when the next episode is released.